Welcome back to the Nutrition Made Simple podcast, powered by Healthy Steps Nutrition. At HSN, we believe something as fundamental as nutrition shouldn't be complicated. That's why we focus on a habit-based and holistic approach. We know that helping you become the best and healthiest version isn't just about what you eat or going to the gym a few hours a week. We have to look at a holistic approach, addressing nutrition, sleep, mindset, support system, lifestyle, and of course, exercise. Our mission is to help 1 million people take control of their health one step at a time so they can prevent and reverse chronic disease. My name is Nicole Coyne, and I'm the founder of Healthy Steps Nutrition, home of CrossFit HSN and HSN Mentoring. Today's podcast topic is something that keeps me up at night. It's a frustrating experience, and people are becoming more and more aware about the corruption in the food, beverage, and pharmaceutical industry. And today we take a deeper dive into that. How food and beverage companies are involved with nutrition regulation, conflicts of interest, and the Dietary Guidelines of America committee who make the dietary guidelines. Even some corruption that I personally saw in the dietetics field, which is super frustrating. Actually, not that long ago, where I went to college, actually posted something about internships, and the 4 companies they listed with internships were Pepsi, General Mills, Kellogg's, and another food company. It's frustrating because they influence a lot of what we learn in school, and they give a lot of money to the organization, and sometimes the best recommendations aren't always taught, and there's definitely some conflicts of interest there. Anyways, we're going to take a deep dive into this. I do want to draw attention to another podcast. Dr. Casey Means and Callie Means were on the Tucker Carlson podcast talking about this in a little bit a different lens. Callie was a lobbyist. Dr. Casey Means obviously a doctor, and they talk about it from a different lens. So something interesting. We will put the link to that in the show notes. Today's podcast guest is Amanda Har. She is one of our dietitians here at HSN. Super excited to take a deep dive into the corruption of the big food industry and the influence with nutrition regulation. We will get to this podcast episode right after this message. Did you know that you can go to hireanutritioncoach.com to find a Healthy Steps nutrition coach near you? The HSN framework has been taught to thousands of gym owners, coaches, dietitians. They're using all of our tools, research framework that's guided, tested, and proven to make a greater impact in their local communities. So if you are looking for a coach to help you create a plan, most importantly, keep you accountable to that in a simple habit-based approach, this would be a really great option for you. Go to hireanutritioncoach.com to find a Healthy Steps nutrition coach near you. All right, let's get to this episode. Amanda, welcome back to the Nutrition Made Simple podcast.
Thank you. It's always great to be here, Nicole.
We are definitely bringing up a controversial subject today, and honestly, I'm excited about it. People need to understand we have a lens that we aren't financially benefiting from a lot of these companies where some other dietitians or people in our industry are, so they don't bring awareness to the issues that we're about to talk about today. It started by the Noakes Foundation, which I've had an opportunity to listen to the founder of this organization talk about obesity. He posted something on social media that I thought was worth a bigger discussion. He wrote, I'm going to quote and read it so I don't mess it up. But basically he said, Pepsi, Coke, Nestle are found to dominate the global food policy. Now, we all can recognize those names, Pepsi, Coke, Nestle, because they do make a lot of sugar sweetened beverages and a lot of different foods. But there's a bigger issue that was exposed by this. And in the comments of this, or in the caption, he wrote, 95% of experts reviewing the 2020 food guidelines had undisclosed financial ties to food and pharmaceutical companies. Companies like Kraft, General Mills, Dannon, Kellogg, lots of different companies and food and beverage companies, and then pharmaceutical companies. I don't think the general public understands how important or how big of an issue this actually is. if you have people who are overseeing the guidelines for Americans for food that are financially benefiting from food and beverage companies, their decisions are going to be swayed in a way that might not be in the best interest of the public. And I'm going to give one example and then we can kind of dig in a little bit deeper. It actually happened a year ago today that we're recording this podcast. We get, do you get the dietitian emails from I guess it's not called the American Dietetic Association anymore, but the governing body of dietitians sends out an email. I don't know how often, but it sends out an email pretty regularly with different studies on it. And one of the studies had the title, More Research Needed to Link Obesity and Ultra-Processed Food. Now, I'm just going to take a pause. I mean, if you read that, what would you think?
Right. Like, what are we doing with our research? That's what I think.
How much more research do we need
Right.
is my first thought. And then yeah, I'm like, okay, well, this is clickbait maybe because I'm very curious about why how are we having this as a headline? The guy who wrote it is a dietitian, also a doctor. He's a lead professor at Purdue University, which does a ton of research. We'll go into the specific about this guy. His name is Richard Mates, who wrote this article. In the article that he wrote, came with a video. In the end, we have an intriguing hypothesis that ultra-processed foods are especially problematic for obesity, but at the present time, an inadequate evidence base to draw a policy or even clinical decisions.
Those last three words are what get me the most, right? Clinical decisions, meaning the way that we help support our clients, right?
Yep. So this guy was on the 2020 board that the Noakes Foundation was talking about earlier. They were talking about 95% of the experts on this board. This is just one of the guys that was on this board. And I have the connection from a year ago. This email didn't just go to me as a dietitian, went to every dietitian in the US. So now the way I see it, it's like muddying the waters, right? Like, oh, let's put this carrot over here that's super distracting. When I initially read it, I'm like, oh, this guy gets money from somewhere. Like this guy, follow the money. There's a money trail that this guy, sure enough, I'm going to put the link to his bio because it was online. He's had millions of dollars in grants from food and beverage companies. This guy is on many different boards. One of them was the whatever the board was, the Dietary Guidelines for America's Committee board, that they make the recommendations for Americans and dietary guidelines. But he's on many different boards, and General Mills, one of them specifically, which if you aren't familiar with General Mills, they basically make 90% of the cereal brands like Cheerios, Cocoa Puffs, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, Pillsbury, Progresso, Total, Wheaties, like all of them, they fund his research. So of course his research is going to go in a way that's benefiting them, right?
Right. That makes me think about even like right now, right? We're in the middle of kind of like the political campaign. Sounds a lot like politics, right?
100%. You know what? And this is just one gun. I guess my eyes are already pretty open to it. And I've shared this story on the podcast before, but years ago, I was on the Entrepreneur Association board for the American Dietetics Association. They have like different subgroups, and one of them was an entrepreneur subgroup. And I was on the board for this group, and I was asked to speak at the national conference on a panel. And I was like, oh yeah, this is awesome. I was never involved, and I was on the board. So like we made a lot of decisions. I was involved in a lot of the stuff. I was never involved in the decision of like who's going to sponsor our talk. Honestly, I would have had Healthy Steps Nutrition sponsor the talk. When I get to the event to speak, I found out that the National Confectioner Sugar Association sponsored my talk. Now, if you want to talk, there was a doctor that I interviewed on this podcast here, last year, I think, and she talked about this idea of moral injury where something is wrong, but financial ties or whatever the system is, you can't do anything about it. And I left that meeting and I stepped down from the board. I was like, I can't do this anymore. But that was just our little talk. And you go into like the bigger conference, and this is where all dietitians come together every single year. And the majority of companies that sponsor that talk or like that conference, which it does take a lot of money to put those conferences on, are the food and beverage companies that are making ultra processed food. But then you've done a lot of research that where these companies like General Mills also have this nonprofit or other side of the company where essentially we're helping the obesity or fueling the obesity crisis. Now, I wouldn't say helping, but fueling the obesity crisis. But then we have this other side where we're showing that we're making a difference related to food and beverage or related to the obesity crisis.
Right. And it's interesting, right? Because I mean, on one side, it's like, okay, now they're putting a good face on it, but it's kind of tricky, right? Because that might be a means to draw attention away from their products that are not supporting our health. Maybe it's a way to, stave off governmental regulation from them or just, keeping up the reputation. Or one of the things, which is like, we see multiple perspectives with this, is, a way to just shift responsibility to the consumer. Like, yes, we make these products, but we're going to put you in charge of not choosing our products too often or choosing them in a responsible way or whatever through these health programs, right? So it's really kind of like a way to push off responsibility onto the people rather than the people producing the products that are highly addictive.
You think about things like looking at kids' foods, like food products. I wouldn't say foods. And they have, the big nutrition claims on the front, made with whole grains or great source of vitamin C or whatever the case, with their favorite cartoon on the front of the box. And then, of course, your child wants that food. And then you turn it over and you're like, oh, the first ingredient is sugar. Oh, the second ingredient, sugar. Oh, it has the amount of sugar that my child needs for the day. And this is like really common in things like yogurts, right? Like, of
Mhm.
course it tastes really good. And we know that the more sugar we have, the more we crave. And then it becomes this vicious cycle that's fueling the obesity crisis.
Right. And unfortunately, the problem is like a lot of consumers or families take those products at face value, right? Like there's no
Mhm.
flipping over of the box or looking at the ingredients or even understanding that ingredients are listed by weight. So if sugar is the first ingredient or second ingredient, that means that there's more sugar in there than the quantity of any one specific ingredient alone, which is a huge problem, right? Like we know this, even though unfortunately, the research is muddy because of these financial ties.
It's, it's something we've been involved with CrossFit for, a really long time. I've had the opportunity to speak at the games and be around, CrossFit Health for a number of years. And something I always respected about Greg Glassman when he owned the company, the founder, is that when you went to the CrossFit Games, there was never a sponsor there that wasn't in line with what he was wanting to do with the business. Like he didn't care about the money. He fronted money. Like he had to pay to make the CrossFit Games happen, but he wasn't going to accept dirty money in his eyes. I'm probably quoting, maybe not quoting, like paraphrasing, what he would say about it, but um, he wouldn't accept or have people sponsor those types of events so that his brand wasn't associated with those companies. And then as soon as it sold in 2020, the next CrossFit Games, Monster was the head title sponsor. And or not head, but one of like the high up, they paid a lot of money to sponsor the games. I'm like, man, luckily this year that's gone, that's not there. But it's tough to see what people will do for money. That you decrease the values that you have morally to gain a little financial incentive. You look at Game Changers, that Netflix documentary that came out that got a lot of athletes turning to plant-based and becoming vegan, and you wonder like, okay, why, how, and then you look like deep down and the executive producer owns a vegan supplement company. Arnold Schwarzenegger is part founder of a vegan product company, and these people who are endorsing the film financially benefited from more people becoming vegans.
Right. So it's just like same problem, different side of the spectrum, basically.
Yeah, yeah. I think the big picture here is like, all right, if you're listening to this, you hopefully this draws awareness that there is a problem, right? A lot of people that are putting out nutrition recommendations get funding from companies that would make their studies lean a certain way or only highlight one percentage that's in alignment with what the company would want or would benefit a company that's funding it, right? Like if I was doing a study and the research didn't come out that would be in benefit, I'm not going to highlight all of the numbers that are not going to be in benefit of the company. It's messed up, but I think that's the way the nature of the game. And this guy, Richard Mates, I think is a really prime example of that. More research needs to come out between obesity and ultra processed food when there's actually quite a bit of research. And there's, you and I started talking before we recorded. There's a difference between like just looking at things face value and then also looking at, all right, how in clinical practice is this working, right? Like between the two of us, we have, 35 years of experience working with clients to help them reduce processed food and help them understand how this connects the dots between how they feel reaching their health and wellness goals, but then also looking at their biomarkers, right? Their blood values, their diabetes being reversed, their triglycerides going down by 30%. I think of um, Andrew and Danielle retested their blood work 3 months after working with you, and their numbers across the board went down by over 20% in improvement, not from adding more ultra processed food or, it was okay. Let's start really focusing on whole foods. Let's focus on exercise. Let's prioritize our sleep. Let's do it together. Those are the things that are really important to help people ultimately take control of their health.
Right, exactly. So I know, yeah, it was basically the opposite of what we're seeing here from what the companies would like. Like they really did decrease the processed food in their lives. Like I know he mentioned, okay, on Sundays after I would preach, I would just, want to eat all the things. So they would, have a lot of processed foods in their eating pattern. And this was exactly the opposite direction. When I see what they're eating now, it's like primarily whole foods. Danielle's cooking, like making these foods that are filling. Because when we think about it, right, like whole foods that are not ultra processed, they have like all of more of what we need for better health and better blood sugar management. The fruit has fiber and water in it rather than, let's say, fruit snacks.
Right.
And then you think about, right, like what else? A potato has, again, starch, vitamins, minerals, fiber in it versus potato chips, which have very inflammatory type of fats added into it. So I just wonder, how can anyone argue that ultra processed foods is not a problem in our society today? Just, I can't.
Well, even when you look at calorie consumption for the overall American, the majority is coming from ultra processed food. And you have a potato, right? But then you could make mashed potatoes and then you have potato chips. And it just becomes more and more processed as companies, make things more palatable, which makes them more addicting, which makes you crave more. And then they sell more and then their company benefits from it, right? You know, ultimately, big picture, if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, man, I didn't understand, I didn't know that that was a problem. I didn't know that existed. Uh, Not all dietitians agree with what has happened in the food and beverage industry. And I think when you see things that are probably too good to be true, doing a little bit of research and reading the disclosures, like where did the money come? Where does this guy get funding? Where does this lady get funding from? Because they have to disclose where their financial ties are. Educate yourself. I think that's really important. There's a guy, Callie Mills, or Callie Means. He has started a company called TrueMed. HSN is actually partnered with it. It's how we accept HSA and FSA for all of our clients. If you have HSA, it'll pay for your nutrition coaching, it'll pay for even your fitness coaching if you're a local client of ours, which is really great. If you've got money that you can use towards health and wellness initiatives, you want to use it. We would love to be able to support you so that you can take control of your health. But he's a great resource. He's been on a ton of podcasts. He actually was on the governmental side. So he has a unique lens where he saw a lot of this firsthand and then now has gone in the complete other side and other direction to help promoting people to understand, how to really take control of their health.
Yeah, I think it's super powerful, right? Like anytime that we've been through something or like have seen the full scope of something in action, like that's so powerful, right? Like we as consumers and even, a lot of us dietitians, like we haven't seen it on the government side of things, right? And I think also this is a great message to any healthcare practitioners listening too, of when we're reading the research, we do need to take that second step further into looking into what are the financial ties, you know, really looking at research with discretion versus, taking it at face value because it's something published on PubMed, right? This is, in just all areas of the healthcare arena, we need this to be, a perspective that's seen.
Absolutely. Well, if you are interested in diving into more research around this, I'm going to put some links that I've used to educate myself in the show notes for this episode, so you can take a look at those specifically around the one guy that I was talking about earlier that gave the headline of more research needed. The ironic thing is this guy has gotten millions, literally millions of dollars of fund money from various food and beverage associations, various grants, that if anyone could, make the conclusion firsthand, it would likely be him. But I'm sure it's not in alignment with what would be beneficial for the boards that he's on for these food and beverage companies, which is unfortunate. So yeah, I think big picture, do your research, take it a step further, but then don't forget what happens in clinical practice. I think sometimes when, I think about firsthand in the hospital, the way we taught people to manage diabetes, the way we actually manage diabetes in the hospital, anyone could have 60 grams of carbs no matter what they had. 60 grams of carbs you could eat in one sitting. And that could mean 3 cups of juice if someone wanted that. And we know that's going to spike up someone's blood sugar drastically because there's not the fiber. We know that liquids are faster digested than solid food. It's going to spike someone's blood sugar up. And then it's this constant catch-up game, giving someone a ton of insulin, and then it's going to crash. And then we've got this constant yo-yo. And a lot of times in the healthcare industry, especially when you think about the hospital setting, it's not the hospital I worked for wasn't just our hospital. We were part of a much larger, US group, and it was policies that couldn't be changed at our hospital. It had to be worked up the many stages of corporate ladder. So, if you are diagnosed with diabetes or whatever the case may be, it also could be doing your extra research to understand, is this really the best route for me? Because I can honestly say the way I was required to teach people in the hospital to manage specifically diabetes is not what I would do today. After looking at continuous glucose monitoring and working with hundreds of people, in practice, there's better ways to do it that the education system hasn't caught up with yet.
100%. I think that the stat is, when we have current research, it takes about 17 years for it to get to our local doctor's office. So keeping that
Wow.
in mind, right? Because I think sometimes it can be really hard, especially when we're working with clients, we tell them one thing, they talk to their doctor says another thing. But first of all, their doctor is not a specialist in nutrition. And also, what age or era of research are they referring to? So definitely making sure that your practitioners are keeping up with research and, doing the education, having a specialist on your side, with the nutrition side of things is going to be so beneficial for taking those best steps forward.
100%. Awesome. Well, Amanda, thank you for coming on the podcast and chatting with me today about this controversial subject that I think needs more light, because once we shed light to it, you can't hide it anymore. And hopefully, things need to change, and hopefully at some point they will.
Right. Yes. Spread the word.
I hope you maybe not enjoyed that episode, but I hope it was enlightening for you. I think sometimes we read a headline or we see something and we take it at face value, but we really need to dig a little bit deeper to find out, where is this information coming from? Who was involved in this? Who's influencing this information? Well, when I used to go to the dietitian conferences, many of these would be sponsored by food and beverage companies that would say, hey, it's okay to have this or that, or they would downplay some of the consequences of overconsumption of processed carbohydrates and excess sugar. And I think it's really frustrating. Next week's episode, we actually have a nurse coming on that has years of experience. She actually did the continuous glucose monitoring experiment with HSN, and it was eye-opening for her. Even some of the healthiest people who know all about health need to take a deeper look inside to understand what's going on the inside of their body. So make sure that you subscribe. Stay tuned until next week. Again, if you are wanting to learn a little bit more about the information discussed in this week's podcast episode, make sure you check out the links in the show notes. The Dr. Casey and Callie Means podcast with Tucker Carlson was really eye-opening. Strongly encourage everyone to listen to that. One cool thing that has come out over the past couple of months is this End Chronic Disease Coalition. And CrossFit, John Fall, the CEO of CrossFit, is actually playing a part in that, going and discussing the impact of functional fitness and eating whole foods and prioritizing nutrition and health on preventing and reversing chronic disease. So it's really cool to see this group of individuals. You can go to End Chronic Disease Coalition to look up and see what they are doing, but they're definitely making waves in the industry. And I'm hopeful that some regulations will change in the future because everything is coming to light.